A surprise result in the Lebanese elections, but will it change anything? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. This Sunday, Lebanon held a parliamentary election, the first since the 2019 protests against the government. The powerful Shia Hezbollah party was expected to win more seats after former Prime Minister Saad Al-Hariri pulled out of the contest, but the group and its allies suffered losses, even in areas they controlled. Priyanaka Navani has details from Beirut.
Nearly 2 full days since the polls first opened here in Lebanon, and the country still glued to their TVs, awaiting news of the full official results from the first parliamentary elections to be held here since 2018. Now, the Ministry of Interior has been releasing information in batches. However, tight races, last-minute counting, and infractions have made it difficult to release all that information at once. However, the Ministry of Interior saying just moments ago that it will be suspending releasing any information on results for tonight, meaning we are not expecting to see any full results for at least several hours. Now, in these elections, all eyes were peeled to how many independent seats could be flipped from traditional parties. Here in Lebanon, we don't know yet what that number will be, but we do know that traditional political parties like the Iran-backed Hezbollah movement and the President's Party, the Free Patriotic Movement, have suffered many blows in these parliamentary elections, making it difficult to know if they will be able to maintain any majority in the parliament at all. Independent candidates have so far taken about a dozen seats and are expected to grab on to about a handful more in the 5 districts that have yet to be counted. I'll also mention that as this has all been happening, the local currency, which has already lost about 90% of its value in recent years, has been slowly dropping as the country plunges into uncertainty. I'm Priyanaka Navani, CGTN, Lebanon.
To discuss the future of Lebanon, let's bring in our guests. From Detroit, Milad Zohrob is a founding member of the Lebanese-American Coordination Committee. Here in Washington, D.C., Nabeel Khoury is the former U.S. diplomat and non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Also in D.C., Mounzer Sleiman is founder and director of the Center for American and Arab Studies. And across the river in Reston, Virginia, Michael Malouf is a former senior Pentagon strategic analyst. Welcome to all of you. Mounzer Sleiman, let me start with you. As we just heard, all the results are not in, but from what we know so far, this is what it looks like to be shaping up to. Hezbollah will suffer losses in parliament. They will lose seats in parliament, but there are several independent or anti-establishment candidates, as they are called in some places, who will pick up seats. So what is your assessment of what we know so far?
I completely disagree with that assessment. First of all, Hezbollah and Amal, which is they call them the dual Shiite camp, they maintain exactly their number that they used to have in the former parliament. Additionally, the most favorable popular person in the entire election was member of Hezbollah. He's Mr. Rad, who got the most the largest number of population. So Hezbollah is still very popular, and also most of his allies. Now, the real battle was between the Christian camps who could maintain the leadership. And it seems to me almost even, if not, some indication continue to represent itself by that Basil, who was sanctioned by United States, still would have maybe at least a majority in Christian camp by 1 member at least. Now, it's true that maybe at the end there would be no majority in the parliament for each camp, and they're going to rely on having some coalition with other individuals and other parties. So unfortunately, the result is the real problem is the electoral system the confessional system in Lebanon,
Right.
the corruption in the interference of other countries. And the United States, by putting sanction on faction in Lebanon, trying to change the equation, the political equation, and try to weaken Hezbollah. And Mr. Schenker, who was Assistant Secretary of State, indicated that a few days ago, despite all what they did, is still Hezbollah the most popular party in Lebanon.
And Nabeel Khoury, what do you make of what we know so far?
Well, first of all, the good news is that the elections were held, and that's a marker that democracy continues to be important and favored. Secondly, that the elections were held safely. So despite totally failed economy, collapsed economy, the state was still able to organize these elections and provide the security necessary, barring a few incidents. That's all good news. Also, the fact that there are 10, roughly, the estimate is 10 new faces in parliament from among the reform-minded civil society groups. So all that is good. Now, the challenge ahead, depending on the final result, is if there is no clear majority, and there might be a bit of a parity, then there will be a problem. And once the parliament, the new people take their seats in parliament, the challenge is to elect a new speaker of the House or re-elect the old one. The challenge is to form a new cabinet. And if they don't agree, you could go in for a prolonged period of no government in Lebanon. And coming up in the fall will be the election of a new president. Yeah. And that's done in parliament. So if there is a stalemate in parliament, that would be a problem as well.
Okay, Nabeel, one other thing, and that is, do you agree with what Mounzer Sleiman just told us, that when all the votes are counted, at the end of the day, that Hezbollah and Amal will retain the number of seats they had in parliament?
Well, we don't know yet. I mean, they may, in the end of the day, even if they lost a few seats, they may still maintain a majority if their coalition holds together. And there's no reason to assume it won't hold together. But really, in the end of the day, the real challenge is that what happens in parliament is not always that relevant. A real policy in Lebanon has always been made outside of parliament. And so regardless of who holds the majority, any big decision will have to be made by consensus or with compromises between the major blocs. They either do that for anything to go through, or if they don't do that, there is stalemate and potential violence.
Milad, Zohrob, of course, we don't know the full makeup of parliament. We would only know that when all the results are counted. And of course, as we've just heard, there could be coalitions of different kinds being formed. But surveys of voters tell us that people are looking for change. Not just change, but they're looking for radical change. I mean, do you expect change to come in the aftermath of this election?
There will be change. Obviously, from the results I just got from Beirut just a few minutes ago before I sat down for the interview, the patriotic movement, which had the largest bloc in the Christian area, is not going to have that. The Lebanese forces will. And these are confirmed numbers and confirmed results. And I really like what I saw, that there are some independent people that really want change. We need change. Lebanon is suffering because of the ruling, I call it gang, but that's why Lebanon is suffering. While the economy and everything else, it's all the decisions they have been making over the years. And they really, there's a lot of thieves in the current government, and they have been for years. They took a lot of money and sent it out of the country, and that's what got us to this point. So I do see change. And I see that it will be the new bloc will be the opposition, what used to be the opposition, hopefully will have a majority. While Hezbollah and Amal maintained quite a few numbers of seats, probably all their numbers, there has been a couple of people that, a couple of members that won against them in the areas they control. And one of the main reasons that nobody wins is because they're afraid to even say a word against Hezbollah because they have seen what they have done in the past and what the results will be if you oppose them or stand against them publicly. So change will be coming. We are hoping, we're crossing our fingers that new results will come up with a new parliament that will work for the change, correct the system, and get Lebanon going like it used to be, the Lebanon I grew up in, where it was the Switzerland of the Middle East.
Michael Malouf, what do you think will be the regional impact of these elections, especially for countries like Saudi Arabia, like Iran, and for Israel as well?
Well, that's all going to depend upon what the outcome is ultimately going to be. I agree with a lot of what was said, that ultimately what we're going to have is change, but is that change going to amount to anything? Will it just be a whole new stalemate? And as a consequence, that change that did occur did see the Lebanese Forces Party make gains. Of course, they were backed by the Saudis. And the Saudis and the French, of course, have ideas of trying to pump more money in there if they had enough of an effort toward the reform. Now, clearly, this election was definitely anti-Hezbollah and talk of reform, but no one ever came up with any concrete proposals. Again, the emphasis will be from the outside. You're going to see the IMF coming in wanting to offer money, but it will be predicated upon whether there's a viable government there. But on the other hand, you're seeing the Saudis trying to inject new influences in that area, and it's going to create more, again, to try to put down Hezbollah. Now, one of the things that could happen with respect to maybe toning down the tensions in the areas if the United States and Iran were to come to an agreement with JCPOA, the nuclear agreement. But my sources are indicating that that may not happen. If it were to happen, then the indication is that Hezbollah would probably be a little more toned down, but then you have the greater influence of the Saudis coming back into the area, and that would be creating a problem unless you have the Saudis and the Iranians coming to some arrangement, an entente of their own, but that's not there yet. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, and I don't think there was enough change that we saw in this last election that's going to bring in the influx of capital that's going to be needed to bring Lebanon out of its economic doldrums. And I think that there is some indication that if this continues on, the potential for a civil war could loom. And I'm very concerned about that. And then you have other outside parties, once again, taking advantage of that.
Mounzer, Sleiman, we're hearing a lot about the independents who have picked up seats in the Lebanese parliament, but there was an interesting analysis which was in the Vox online news site, which said that, it reported that the patronage network, what it calls the patronage network of traditional networks, runs deep in Lebanon, and it will be difficult to dislodge. But change, they say, can come from the new leaders. Do you see this happening?
Absolutely. There could be a wishful thinking about change in Lebanon. And I want to separate it from the real hope and a genuine hope for change. What we are witnessing, even with the last election, with this election, is a symbolic change, which means that as long as the confessional system existed in Lebanon, that will feed to corruption and feed to what you refer to in Lebanon. It's like a clanship system based on family and religious. So as long as I tie this issue of the wishful thinking with the denial of why Lebanon is suffering what's suffering. Lebanon is suffering because of the leadership, the failure of the leadership and the corruption of the leadership.
Right.
But let's go further than that. Also suffering because of United States policy toward Lebanon that is insisting on weakening Hezbollah, who prove every election that he's popular in Lebanon. Even Schenker was talking about weakening inside the people who are supporting Hezbollah.
Right.
It proved to be that he has landslide as far as his own community. So we need real reform in Lebanon, and principally to eliminate the confessional system and allow the will of the people to represent itself. Now, Lebanon suffering, we could alleviate some of the suffering if we not allow everybody to wage a political campaign instead of having reform and having programs. Let's say this election, as Michael said, there was no plans about how to help the people, how to resolve the problem facing the people are facing. So it's only because of political slogans that even the opposition to Hezbollah, while Hezbollah, by the way, for its credit, they presented some real solution to the lack of electricity, to lack of energy in Lebanon, to have some reconstructing of the instruction in Lebanon. All that Iran, let's say, supporter of Hezbollah,
right,
was able and willing to do it. China, even Russia, etc., other countries who prevented that from happening is the people who are supported by United States and by United States policy. So we need to change that. As long as we continue to have this kind of sanction and kind of siege on Lebanon, kind of insisting on weakening the party instead of resolving and addressing the people. United States could be better by presenting an example how can we resolve the problem of Lebanon. That can isolate Hezbollah, or at least there would be competition on the solution for at least to help the people that suffering really, and it's almost a failed state in Lebanon.
Okay, let me get Michael Malouf's opinion on that. Michael, does the United States have to change, and probably change radically, its policies towards Lebanon?
Oh, sure. I truly believe that. It is, you see, the problem for the United States is not just Lebanon or Ukraine. It is trying to maintain its dominance as the head and leader of a world order that is quickly being challenged by Russia, China, Iran, and Lebanon and Ukraine are just cogs, if you will, in that overall scheme. And the United States, even though it was trying to get out of the Middle East, really has no choice, because what's going to happen, as I think, is that you're going to have a stalemate occurred once again. You're going to have Russia and China playing a much more dominant role, even in Lebanon, as well as Iran. And the United States will, because it cannot be a key player and challenge successfully both China and Russia in that area, is going to look and pivot eastward, as it's been trying to do for quite some time. And as a consequence, it's going to be, you're going to see more influence coming from China, Iran, and Russia over time. For Russia, Lebanon has to remain somewhat stable because it wants to keep stability in neighboring Syria. It cannot afford to have all of its investment and effort in Syria go up in flames. And that means ultimately that Russia and Hezbollah will probably work more closely together along with Iran, and China will be coming in there economically as it has been doing. And I think that that's where things will settle. The United States has imposed too many onerous conditions, and they're working through Israel in order to try to get Lebanese forces now to create greater anxieties and internal disorder within Lebanon. And as a consequence, we're going to have a flare-up. And it's all meant to be anti-Hezbollah. And that's not the way to go.
Nabeel, Khoury, I want to get back to something that Mounzer Sleiman was talking about a moment ago, and that is a very big issue in Lebanon, the issue of corruption. In fact, the New York Times published a piece not so long ago in which it said that the multitude of crises Lebanon faces, from triple-digit inflation to energy shortages to that deadly port blast in Beirut, can be attributed to corruption or misrule. Do you think in the aftermath of this election there will be any accountability? Will there be a time of reckoning?
No, sadly, I doubt that very much. It seems a maximum of new faces will probably be 10 seats in parliament, and that's not at all enough to force any change. The rest, regardless of who has more seats than the other, are all part of the old political elite, which is totally corrupt. The catch-22 of Lebanese reform is that you really need to reform the entire system, going all the way back to the National Pact of 1943. You need to uproot that system and come in with a new modern system. The trouble is that you need the system to reform the system, and the system is not going to reform itself. So I don't hold much hope. The corruption is a big part of it. The fact that Lebanon has always been ruled by consensus, either all the political mafia leaders, sorry, I don't call them political parties, if they can all agree on something, then it can happen. If one of them disagrees, then there is a stalemate and nothing moves forward. It used to be that the big decisions, such as does Lebanon remain independent or unify within an Arab entity of some sort, those were the kinds of decisions that the National Pact agreed would be by consensus. But the way it developed because of corruption, it ended up that you couldn't even collect garbage in the streets or decide which company will recycle the garbage unless there was consensus, because there is kind of a division in terms of the spoils of the economy, and some people control electricity, others control the generators that supplement the electricity, on and on. Even garbage is a business, and if they don't agree who's going to get the cut, the percentage from any new investment, then garbage is not collected. That is a failed state, and I don't see any hope of change in the coming few years.
Milad, Zohrob, when it comes to economic issues, financial issues, the new parliament will have its work cut out because it will have to implement key reforms in the future. Among those reforms are amendments to the country's banking laws. There will have to be an independent audit of the central bank, and of course there will also be there's also been losses, billions of dollars in terms of losses in the financial sector, which would have to be addressed. I mean, how big are those challenges?
The challenges are really big. The Lebanese American Coordination Committee we had a conference in D.C., in Washington, D.C., 2 weeks ago, and we didn't talk any politics. We just basically had experts speak about issues and solutions, and the banking system and the economy was a major topic. It is going to be a major problem. The IMF, we had a representative from the IMF. He came and spoke to us for about 45 minutes, and he presented what they want in order to get into Lebanon and help Lebanon. And it's all dependent on the current government, the corrupt government that continues to not to work with the IMF. They would not do what the IMF asked for. They will not allow the investigation that you were talking about a few minutes ago in the port explosion to go on. They have stopped it because we know something's going to come out of it that's going to be pointed at some Lebanese party or group. So it is a major challenge, but we are hoping. We had meetings at the State Department, at the White House, and in Congress, and so they're all the U.S. of A. is out there to help us, but we need to help ourselves. We as Lebanese have to come together, all of us, and move on.
Right. Talking of coming together, Mounzer, Sleiman, I mean, if we look at some of the issues that Lebanon faces right now, I mean, what are prospects in the short term to address these issues? Things like poverty. Looking at some figures here, a UN agency says that more than 80% of the country's population of 6.8 million now live in some form of poverty, and they measure that in several ways, in things like access to sanitation, access to health care, access to education, etc. These are issues that face the people of the country right now. What are the prospects that they will be addressed in the short term?
We were talking about alleviating the suffering, at least in the short term. The issue goes back to corruption and to the staggering amount of money that was kind of left the country under the guise and the eyes of United States, who talks about corruption in Lebanon. They were able to identify only 3 political opponents in Lebanon. They don't agree with the United States view. Lebanon is a very rich country if it can extract its resources of oil and gas, and that issue is hostage to Israeli policy. That United States is always supporting the Israeli policy and preventing Lebanon from exercising its right to its resources. So if we're able, with the assistance of other countries, especially the United States, to really fight corruption and to return the money that we're stealing from the Lebanese to Lebanon treasury, and at the same time to the people who lost their deposit. At the same time, we will work clearly to extract and develop the energy resources offshore Lebanon. That could send a positive signal that the help is coming. And at the same time, Lebanon does not need to always depend on outside help and aid. So at least in the short term, I think that any government is coming to be formed need to address those issues, the issue of the money that left the country or stalling from the people, and who is responsible for that, and at the same time to work effectively to start benefiting from the resources that the country has.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. We have run out of time. Thank you to all of you for being with us. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arland Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.